Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this tutorial on incremental effects. The concept of an incremental effect is basically what I have over here. You have a trigger, and the longer you hold it down, the further it expands. I have made some settings here. I can color shift in multiple directions, and the longer I hold down, the further it shifts away. If I reduce some speed, but I can also still do short presses and slowly increase it. During this tutorial, we will start with a generator patch to introduce the concept of accumulation to slowly grow a value. And after that, we're going to do an incremental effect patch together. And we'll wrap up this tutorial by looking at some other examples. One note before we get started, this tutorial is done in Resolume 7.22. 7.22 introduced the piano mode for the Boolean note, and that's something we'll be using in this tutorial, so make sure you are up to date. That's about it, so let's get started. So here we are in Resolume Wire with a brand new patch. First off, I'm going to show how accumulation works. For this, we'll create a Boolean node. So the Boolean will return us either false or true. And if we set it to piano mode over here, it will only show this value for as long as we hold down the button. I made a tutorial on the piano mode, so I'll put a card on the top of the screen right now. You can watch that if you want to learn more about the piano button. So we want to go into the accumulate node to accumulate a value. This will help us to do the incremental effects later on. Now if I hold down the Boolean and have a look, the value has accumulated. Note that the bool is converted to either 0 or 1 in this case. So let's visualize that using a string node. And I'll put that into a text render so we can actually see what we're doing. Let's reset the accumulate. And now as long as I hold down the bool, like every frame, 1 is getting added to the accumulate. That's all great, but let's do something useful with it. I will use Command L shortcut with all nodes selected to auto layout the patch, clean it up, and then we need something to visualize it. So I will use the metaballs effect, or sorry, metaballs source, I have to say. And here we have a time parameter that animates this shape. So to do this, to animate this, I will create a triangle oscillator and put it into the time. Now we have some sort of animation going on. By increasing the amplitude, we get a little bit more movement, and let's reduce the frequency. So the whole point of this demonstration is that we will use the accumulation value to set the frequency. So we could obviously put this into here, but now we're having a frequency of 939 Hertz, which is not a really great value to do any animation with. So we could take the Boolean and we could divide it. Let's say we divide it by, I say, 100. Let's see how that works for us. And reset it. So now eventually, well, maybe we should do 1000. Let's reset this again. Great. Now we're slowly, it's like I'm holding down this button. We're getting faster and faster and faster. Now I've been doing the manual reset all the time, so maybe it's time we do a little automation on that. For this, I will take the Boolean and say on change. So only when this value changes, you can see two flashes of this output when I hit it and when I release it. All right, we're going to use that trigger to reset the accumulate node. To do this, right-click the accumulate, look at visibility, and you want to expose the reset. Put that in here. And now when we click and release, we go back to 0. We can see that in the text render also. Oh, we need to add some decimals over here. Let's say 2 decimals. So we are increasing. And when I release the button, we're back to 0. Great. Now I want to introduce the concept of clamping. This is more relevant for the next patch that we're going to make, but this is an easier patch to introduce it in. So what we'll do is add a clamp to the accumulate, and it will clamp the value between 0 and 1. So what clamp does is whatever value goes in, it can never be lower than the minimum and it can never be higher than the maximum. So this way, even if somebody were to hold this button down for an hour, it would still max out at 1. So let's put that in here as well. Give that a try. Still looking at a text render over here. Quickly move the division to 100. We go up and it clamps at 1, even though the actual accumulate value might be a lot higher right now. So that's very useful as well. Let's put that back to 1000. Now what would be cool to do is maybe smooth it. So let's move here, double click a chord, insert a smooth node. Let's look at how that looks visually. I will use the dashboard over here to trigger. So it slowly starts in, and when I release, it sort of fades back out. That's what the smooth node does. It takes whatever value comes in and it smooths it by the duration. The duration is in seconds. So over the course of a second, fade back to 0. So that wraps up the concept of accumulation. I have made a dedicated accumulate tutorial, so you can check that out if you want to learn more about accumulate. But for now, we're moving on to the next section, and that's where we will build our effect. So this is the effect we are trying to achieve. The concept is very simple. By holding down the trigger button, we can shift the red, green and blue color channels into cardinal directions. So up, down, left and right. I also add an off button here. We want to control the speed of how fast the accumulation is growing. So we can go from very slow to very fast. We want to control the amount of smoothing so that when it fades back, it goes nice and smoothly back together. We'll start out by creating the actual effect. For this, we need a texture in, which is the clip that would be in Arena. We use the test card here in Wire for that. And we go into the color offset effect. We want to offset these colors, but we want to do it incrementally. And once we are done with that, we want to send the effect out again, and for that we use a texture out node. This is literally a whole effects chain, and the rest is just doing the values. So let's start implementing the incremental movement. For this, we need the boolean, which we'll set to a piano button, a accumulate node, and we can do the reset already. We showed you how to do that. So we reset, and on change, we hit the reset. So our accumulation cycle is done, and we could just plug that into one of the channels, and we are accumulating. Next, we would like to control the speed of the accumulation. For this, we're going to multiply, because this boolean produces either a 0 or a 1, so we're accumulating by 1. In the previous example, that was way too much because we were working with frequency, but now we are working with pixels, so we're actually accumulating 1 pixel per frame, which is quite slow. So for this, we're going to add a multiply node, which will fit in between the accumulate and the boolean in. And now we need something to multiply with. I will create an integer in node, and I will call this speed. In the node panel, we can set the range. The minimum value would be 1 pixel. And the maximum value, let's do 100 and see where that takes us. So now I can plug this in. At 1, we're moving very slow. But moving this up, we can already get really fast accumulations. Note that we're going to add the smoothing later on, so like the super high speeds will be toned down a little bit. Final cool thing we can do, because the speed is in pixels, we can, in the node panel, go to the unit and set it to pixels if you like. This is just a cosmetic thing. It's not it doesn't have any effect on the output of the integer in itself. So now let's do the smoothing. I will move this over a little bit, insert a node, smooth. So now we have the smooth, the sort of drop back that we did in the previous example as well. And I want to edit the duration of this. So a quick way to do this would be to right-click the duration and say expose as input. This will create an input slider for me. Currently, it doesn't have a minimum value and no maximum value, so that's why it has a minimum value but not a maximum value, so we cannot create a slider. But if we say we have a maximum and we say, let's say 5 seconds or something, and now when we trigger, we slowly go back and we can increase it. And also know that the speed is affected here as well. I think 3 might be too much, so maybe a range 0 to 2, up and down, and at higher speeds. Yeah, it also smooths. Great. Let's quickly clean this up. I'll select these nodes and hit Command L on Mac, Control L on Windows to auto sort the patch. So far we have only been able to move our color into a diagonal upright position, but we would like to distort into the cardinal direction, so left, right, up and down. In order to do that, we need a float to node. And now we can say, okay, we only want to do this over the x-axis. So when I hit the trigger now, we move to the right. If we were to put it into the y, we move up. But then we also want to have the negative directions. And for this, I'll insert a negate node. That node basically takes a value and makes a negative value out of it. So now we will be moving down. And on the x-axis, we're moving to the left. Great. But now we want our user to switch between these modes. For this, we're going to create a switch node. Let's make a little bit space. And for this mode, we'll have 5 options: left, right, up, down, and don't move at all, because we want to add the option to, well, not move a given channel. So in the switch node, we'll go to size and say 5. So here we have case 0 until 4, because programmers like to start counting at 0. So let's first do the X. I'll grab the original value, move it into the first case, the negative value into the second case, then duplicate the whole thing by holding down Alt on Windows or Option on Mac. Make a duplicate, but this time on the y-axis. Now we have our positive y in case 2, our negative y in case 3, and our final case, which would be off, is just going to be 0, 0, so there's not going to be any movement over for the color. Now we need a way to switch between these cases. Really easy way to do this is right-click the switch and say expose as input. I'm going to move this to signal flow and put it on the red channel. Now, if the selection, we'll rename this later, but selection is at 0, so we should be moving to the right. Now I move it to 1, we should be moving to the left, correct. At 2, we would be moving up. At 3, moving down. And at 0, nothing. So instead of having this slider and having the user figure out what this does, I'm going to call this channel, or let's do it properly and call it red channel. And under the options count in the integer node, this is actually an integer node, integer in node. We can see that over here. We can set the option count to 5. Right, and now we get a drop-down menu, option 1 till 4, and we're going to say to the right, that would be x plus, to the left, x minus, up, x plus, down, y minus, and doing nothing at all, we call it off. Great. And if there is room for it, we can say to the option view, do buttons. I think this looks pretty cool. So now we have this option over here to say, okay, we want to have buttons. Of course, the buttons don't fit into this node interface itself, but we have it over here. Say, okay, when I move to the left, X minus, trigger, that works. So we have made our little switch interface. All right, I hear you thinking, what about the rest of the channels? Good point. So for this, we could do it two ways. We could duplicate both the switch and the channel and maybe call it green channel. And we take these same values and we plug them into here and eventually to the green channel over here. But I'm gonna show you a little bit of a neater trick using the join node. We will duplicate the red channel, the input of the red channel. Let's call it green channel and remove the 2. And we're gonna have blue channel. Again, removing the 2. Now we're gonna, for the moment, disconnect the switch from the color offset. Select these and we're gonna create a join node. So what we wanna do, we wanna create a collection of these input values. We could do it like this and then turn it into a switch. That would work. Or if you're a really cool kid like me, you select all the inputs and hit Command J on Mac and Control J on Windows to create a join node out of multiple nodes with the same type, because these all output integer. If you were to have a float2 and a integer, for example, you would not be able to join them. They have to be the same type. All right, we put this in. And now we have 3 float2 values indicated by the amount of instances over here. Now, in order to distribute them to the channels, we will use the split node. So we get the individual channels again, and we can input them like this. Already here, we have now our channels in the dashboard and could do something like this. And wham, we are moving all channels at the same time. All right, let's wrap this up by making the interface a little bit prettier. First of all, we have this bool in, which I'm gonna rename to shift. I wanna have the speed and the duration sliders at the bottom. And I think duration is also a weird term, like duration of what. So we're just gonna call it smoothing, which makes more sense. And then we have these buttons, and I'm gonna put them into a group. So under the cogwheel icon over here, I'll create a new group. I'll call it channels, move it down over here, and then add the red, green, and blue channel to it. Now we have this channels groups with each channel in it, which is collapsible, which just cleans up the interface on the Arena side. Talking about the Arena side, time to save our patch. I will go to patch, give this a name. I will say tutorial incremental shift. And now the category part is important. You have to set it to an effect in order for Arena to pick it up as an effect. I'll go to patch, save. It will use this name, save. Now let's move over to Arena to check out our work. All right, here we are in Arena. And let's load up our effect. I will, in the layer panel, double click on the layer to open up the quick menu. I will look for, I call it tutorial, incremental shift. There it is. Bam. And we have our shift button. We have our channels. Notice that the off is working too. We can increase the speed. Let's put on more is better. So we could make a very quickly exploding effect. We can fold the channels. This is because we made the group, which makes the interface just looks a little bit more cleaner. And we have the smoothing, which we can reduce to make a more sudden approach. Now we could do something like add an envelope to this and say something like a BPM sync. So the trigger is on the downside. So we could make an envelope something like this. And of course, just imagine a beat underneath this, and that will work just fine. You can even make it like shorter. Maybe that works a little bit better. Anyway, this is all up for you to experiment with. But that's how you create an incremental effect in Resolume Wire. Let's have a look at a couple more examples. So here I have made a little liquefy effect with the same concept. When I hit the trigger, oh, I have to select this. When I hit the trigger, we will slowly start to distort and liquefy the input. I've loaded up a clip quickly because it looks a little bit cooler than the texture in. We can see it here as well. The concept is the same. We have a piano bool, we accumulate and clamp, but in this case we are generating fractal noise. So it zooms out. We are modulating the density and the phase offset with the accumulated piano bool. Here on the bottom, we're also modulating the gain of the offset over here. So we're going from the trigger up to onto an accumulation and into the fractal noise. Again, accumulate into fractal noise, and at the bottom we are just turning it on and off. There's some smoothing going on, fader, quads. So we are using the just the bool with a smooth to turn a fader up. So our visual slowly fades in. We're using a mirror quad to make it symmetrical, a vignette to round off the harsh edges, and then we go into a UV offset. And we're doing that in both left and in right direction, mixing it together for our final result. So just to show that there's other options with this method. Let's look at another one. In this example, we're using again an accumulation technique combined with a clamp to modulate the frequency and smoothing the amplitude of a square oscillator, as well as resetting it here at the bottom. And that is used to control a fader, which basically gives us a rising strobe effect. And when I release, we go back. Let's turn off make the background black. Boom, 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 boom. And we are strobing at max. So it's a sort of a ramping strobe effect. Here we apply the same concept again. We are accumulating a value. We're using a knot to reverse bypass a pixelate effect, so turning it on instead of turning it off using the bypass, and adding some color offset. And when I pixelate it, we slowly grow into more thicker pixels. So that's basically the concept of the whole incremental effect. You use a Boolean with an accumulate node, and from there you go wild and crazy. I think this is a good moment to wrap up this tutorial. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section below, and I will see you in the next one.